Hi, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Mindful Marathon Conversations. I am Michelle Quirk. I'm a pediatrician, a run coach, and founder of Mindful Marathon, where I help make running easy and fun for busy professionals. And today I have a super duper special guest here with me. I have with me today Coach William Blaser. He is a researcher, an accomplished runner and marathoner, a run coach, founder of Blaser Coaching Services, and my awesome run coach. So welcome to the show, Billy.
Well, thank you very much. I'm happy to be here. This is exciting.
This is very exciting for me. So tell us a little bit about yourself and tell us how your journey into running began.
Right. So I guess the way I like to describe running and myself's relationship is it's on and off again. So it started when I was younger. Like most in middle school, we did the PE class, the mile, and admittedly, I was not very good at it. And all throughout, during different points of my adolescence, it would come back into it. And so, like, for example, my mom and I, for a summer, we did a little bit of running together, and we did it on the track and outside. I think that was in like the ninth grade. And then after that, I joined the football team. They encouraged us to do a spring sport. And so I did track and field, and I threw the discus and the shot put. We also did a thing called the 4x100 Fat Man Relay Team. And so all the throwers would get together, and we would convince the other schools to do a 4x100 with only throwers. And everybody would cheer us on and laugh at us as we did it, because we were not the runners, we were the throwers. And so it was a fun experience for ourselves and for everybody. And so then in one of the years, I don't remember which year it was in high school, I actually tried out for the 2 mile team on our track team. And if memory serves me correctly, I actually finished last behind all the guys and all the girls.
Wow.
And the coach told me, hey, maybe this isn't for you. Maybe running's not your thing. And admittedly, looking back on it, it had to do with I didn't do any practice. I mean, I just went out there and tried to run 2 miles.
Mhm.
So the story really pivots when I was going from my junior year to senior year for football, and the season had just ended, and it became apparent to me that to play varsity football, I would need to be bigger. Because at the time I was around 165 pounds. I played offensive line, and that wasn't going to cut it to play varsity senior year. And so in the span of 4 months, I gained 80 pounds, and I didn't do it. I mean, I don't know if there's a right way to gain that much weight, but I didn't do it the right way. And it had reverberations across my life for probably the next decade.
Mhm.
And so it put me in a big hole from a health standpoint. And so, we fast forward a couple years. I think it was 2010. I had hit my heaviest. Well, it was 2009, because it was before my wife and I got married.
Mhm.
And I was 255 pounds.
Wow.
And I just didn't feel healthy anymore. And so, my wife and I that summer, we did some running, maybe a mile or two here and there, and nothing structured. And it was just kind of like you put some shoes on with your basketball shorts and you just go out the door, and you do that. I never really liked it that much. Um, but one thing really stuck to me that summer was we were coming back from a basketball game that the two of us had played at the gym together.
Mhm.
And we saw a guy chasing a car that had a clock on it. And I was like, what is this guy doing? He's in a race. This is pretty cool. And so, like, he was running across the street. And so, like, it stuck in my mind. And then we walked and we got to home,
Mhm.
and then we saw him again. And I'm like, how did that guy get from over there to here when he didn't, take the shortest path like we did? I was like, man, that is awesome. And so I actually sat outside and from inside, I watched out the window, and it started raining, and I saw all these people running through the rain, and I was like, they're all smiling. They're all really enjoying this. And so I looked it up, and it was a 5 mile race, local in Madison. And I was like, man, 5 miles. That's an accomplishment. And these guys are doing it in the rain. This is awesome. And so, that was a moment, but it didn't stick,
Yeah.
and I didn't pursue it. And so flash forward to 2012, it's January, and I had decided to go in for a physical with my doctor, get a checkup and make sure, we can see where I'm at.
Mhm.
And admittedly, the doctor was very blunt with me and said, "Do you want to have kids when you grow up?" And I said, "It's one of my life's passions. It's something I really want to do in life." And he said, "Based on the path you're on right now, you're not going to be able to enjoy your kids' lives." And that really hit me, because this is something I really want to do, and here's the doctor telling me you're not headed down the right path.
Yeah.
And so that's when it clicked, and I said, I need to make changes moving forward. And so for a few months, I changed my nutrition and tried to get healthier through lifestyle choices. And eventually I hit a plateau and said to myself, okay, I guess I've got to do some exercise and actually go out the door. And trust me when I say it, I didn't want to do it. I did not want to head out there and start exercising. And so I believe it was June 27th, 2012.
Wow.
I put on a pair of shoes and headed out the door. And that's where it started. That's where the running adventure started.
That's awesome. I did not know all of that backstory about the football team and how you had gained the weight for football primarily. Wow.
Yes.
It's
Yes.
it's just hard for me to imagine, because I didn't know you back then and I know you now, but I can't imagine you running at that weight that you were. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
yeah. Oh my goodness, it's a really, I mean, well, we'll have to keep going, but I also started running in 2012, which is interesting.
Oh,
But
look at
anyway,
that.
that
Running
was really when I was,
twins.
yay. That summer, really. And then I ran my first
There
5K
you
like
go.
the summer after. So hey, all right. Okay,
So
no,
my
wait.
my
Yeah, go
first
ahead.
race, my first race was a marathon.
Right. Yeah, tell us about
Yeah.
that.
Okay.
Who
So like
decides
I
the
said,
first race is a marathon, by the
yeah,
way? Only
okay.
Coach
So
Billy.
so
Okay.
here's the thing. So like I said, I started in June 2012, June 27th, and I believe it was mid-August.
Okay.
And one of my wife's friends was like talking to my wife, and she's like, "Hey, you should run this half marathon that's for Halloween. So it's in 8 weeks." And Steph's my wife, and she's saying to me, "Oh, maybe you want to do this. You're starting to get into running. You can do this half marathon." And so I'm like, "Oh, what's a half marathon?" And her friend explains that it's 13.1 miles. And I'm like, "Oh, I mean, yeah, I could probably do that, because I'm doing 3 to 4 miles right now, maybe a 5 here or there. But yeah, 13.1, yeah, that seems like something I could probably do." And so I went on the website and I'm looking at the races, and I was like, well, there's this thing called a marathon, and it's only $10 more. And I was like, you get twice the distance for such a minimal increase in cost. Why wouldn't everybody do that? It's such a great deal. And so I gave that idea to my wife's friend, and she said, um, you you can't do that. And I took it personally. I said, no one's going to tell me anymore what I can and can't do. And retrospectively, what she really meant was you shouldn't do that. And she was correct, because the race was in 8 weeks and the most I'd ever done was 5 miles. But that's where the story goes, is I just kind of looked on the internet and said, oh, this is what people do for a marathon. Okay, I've got 8 weeks. I can throw in a 18 miler and a 20 miler, and then I'll be ready on race day. And so, yeah, a marathon was my first race.
Amazing. And
Terrible choice. I should add, as a running coach, don't do that. Terrible choice. Actually, my wife's grandfather practically had to carry me into the car after the race was over, because I was in so much pain,
yeah,
which is not the way it should be.
no. And did you think, I mean, did you think at that time that it was going to be like one and done when you signed up for it? Like, oh, marathon, that sounds cool. Like, I'll just do that. Or
Right. So when I signed up for it in August, I set myself 3 goals that I wanted to achieve. The first goal was run a marathon.
Mhm,
The second goal was to run it in 4 hours or less,
mhm,
because I had looked and that seemed to be like something where the internet told me, oh yeah, this is a good amateur goal. And then the third goal was to qualify for Boston.
mhm.
And again, the internet told me that that was a relatively high achievement for the marathon. And it ends up being somewhere around 4 to 5% of everybody's age category qualifies for Boston based on their marathon performance. And
Mhm.
so those are the 3 goals I set at the time. As soon as I crossed the finish line in October 2012, I said never again. And I never wanted to do another marathon after that because the experience was so terrible. Who puts themselves through this? This wasn't fun. It was a terrible experience. And it's a funny story. So the reason that the marathon came back into my life. So my wife is a huge Disney fan, and so me, I tolerate it, and we go on the trips, but she wants to go like every year, twice a year, 3 times a year, and me, I'm like, yeah, we could go once every 5 years or whatever. And so she was trying to find a hook for me,
Okay.
and she found Run Disney, which puts
Oh.
the races on in Disney World. And she was like, hey, have you heard about this thing called the Goofy Challenge? And I was like, okay, what's this? And she's like, well, in January, Run Disney puts on a race where you do a half marathon the day before you do the marathon. And I was like, yeah, no, I don't want to run a marathon. Why would I want to run a half marathon the day before the marathon? That just seems insane. And so it went a few weeks, months. I think it was April 2013,
Mhm.
and Run Disney announces the Dopey Challenge, and it's 4 days, 4 races, 5K, 10K, half and full. She comes back to me with that, and I look at her and I go, yeah, I'm in. I don't know why. I don't know why. It just hooked
Wow.
me. It was like 4 days, 4 races. In fact, it gave me the feeling, I'm personally never going to qualify for the Olympics. I'm not that good. But when you watch it on TV and you see the track and field events and they have
Mhm.
to compete multiple days in a row, it's kind of like that feeling where you're like, huh, that's kind of interesting. Like there's some strategy involved in what you do in each of the 4 days,
Mhm.
as they build upon each other. And so, a little bit from that aspect, it was like, oh, this might be an interesting thing to try.
Yeah, it's definitely a challenge of endurance in
Hmm.
a lot of different ways, not just in the running, but in the
No,
early wake up times and all of that.
yes, yes. And actually the vacation part of it, where,
Right.
where you're going to all the rides and eating all the foods.
It's sort of unrealistic to stay off of your feet while you're in Disney, no matter how hard you try to
No,
do that
well,
while you're there to race.
it's an agreement between my wife and I that it stays a vacation, and so I must participate in 99% of the activities that everybody else that's on the vacation does,
Mhm.
and it's my choice to also include the racing, which is supposed to be on the side.
Yeah, yeah. I also want to go back and just say that your experience with the marathon, for everybody listening, you have to keep listening. It really, there's a turning point of the story and marathons become wonderful. So I don't want you to think you
Yes.
that the marathon is supposed to be that painful.
No, no. That's the key, I guess, with proper training and
Yes,
proper knowledge and guidance.
yes.
uh, Things will definitely improve.
With Coach Billy's help, I ran my first marathon, and when I crossed the finish line, I was ready to do another. So there you go. So okay, let's switch and talk about that. How did you end up coaching other people?
That's a good question. So it was 2015, and I'll move back just a few months before that.
Perfect.
And so we're in the spring of 2015, and I had just attempted, I think, was my 5th marathon, and I was still trying to break 4 hours. Now it's been a little under 3 years.
Okay.
and I still hadn't broken 4 hours, and that was my goal. And that race in the spring of 2015, I believe, was a 4:58, and I believe that is my worst marathon, and it was not a great experience. And so after that, I decided, okay, I've got two paths in my way here. I can choose to give up and say, this is it, I can't do this, like, it's a great goal to have set for myself, but I'm not going to be able to achieve it. Or I go down the other path, which is I need to find a different way from what I've been doing and see if I can't figure out why I'm not being successful in my goal. And so I sat down with research journals and books, listened to podcasts, every piece of information I could get my hands on to try and figure out what I was doing wrong and what I could change to improve the experience.
Mhm.
And so I made all of those changes, and in 18 weeks, I dropped my PR from, I believe it was 4:20 prior to that spring 2015 marathon, to in October of 2015, I ran a 3:38.
Amazing.
And it was a 42-minute PR or something
Yeah.
like that. And that's when I said to myself, okay, you've definitely figured something out. You
Mhm.
need to get the word out, because it didn't necessarily click when I would look through other places or other sources, but all of a sudden things started to make a lot more sense.
Mhm.
And so that's when I wanted to reach out to other people and see if I couldn't help them experience the same thing I did. Because from a runner's perspective, I know how hard everyone else is working.
Mhm.
And I also know what it feels like to achieve the goals that you've set for yourself. And so if there's something that I can do to help you also achieve those goals and get that same feeling that I had on that day, then I'll spend whatever time is necessary to get that done.
Mhm.
And that's really what pushed me in that direction
Yeah.
of trying to help others.
I love it. And now you have, I mean, I can't even say, you have written over 500 training plans now, right? I mean, yeah.
Yes, yeah, and
It's amazing.
all completely custom.
Yep.
Everybody's unique in their background, and so it's necessary to construct the plan around that uniqueness.
Mhm.
And that 500 training plans represents over 170 different people. And like I said, none of them are the same, because none of those people are the same.
Yeah. I love to think about how many people you inspired to the sport, like how many other people were like me and all of the Run Disney runners who maybe, signed up for the race thinking like, oh, this might be fun, and then got totally hooked.
Yes.
And then had bigger and bigger goals for themselves,
Yep.
whether it's a
That,
longer race or the challenge, the goofy challenge or the dopey challenge. But yeah, the Coach Billy is very active in the Run Disney community, and he's helped a lot of people to many a finish line over there.
and it means a lot to me. I mean, when I, when it comes to Run Disney races, I sit there. I actually sat at the finish line of many of the races with my phone, watching all the runners on my phone and their progress, and to see their faces when they cross the finish line and achieve whatever they set out for themselves. There is no other greater joy. Like,
Mhm.
it brings me pleasure to see them so happy.
Yeah. Yeah, true story. In 2018, when I got to the finish line, I heard somebody yelling my name, and I was so disoriented, like with the finish line and just this whole momentous thing. And there's Coach Billy on the sides cheering me through the through the finish line. It was amazing. I'll never forget it. And then I was ready to do another one. Maybe not like soon, but
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
it was great. Oh, so tell us, okay, what is your like biggest piece of advice maybe for a beginner runner or somebody who, took some time off and was an on again, off again runner, as you describe it? That was kind of me too for a very long time.
So I guess there's a few things that you want to think about. One of my big things that I push is, what's your motivation? why are you doing this? And there's a whole bevy of explanations for why people decide that they want to start running, whether it's for the purposes of getting healthier, or they want to run a certain distance, they want to beat someone else's time that they know, they want to, set arbitrary time goals for themselves, whatever has you. And so that really is the button, as I call it. Like, you as a coach, we want to find what that motivation is, so that when that time comes where they need to have a little push, you can push that button and you say, hey, remember that time you told me about, your motivation was, for your parents to see X, Y, or Z, like, let's get out the door and let's make this happen, because you're right there, and you can do it. And then, beyond just the motivation aspect of it, like when you're getting down into the nitty gritty of what you should do in terms of as a beginner or returning runner, the easiest advice is to run far slower than you think you should be. And so if you go out, and here's the way I explain easy days. You should put on your running gear, your shoes, and head out the door. You should run for some amount of time. If it's a beginner, it's probably going to be something like 15, 20, 30 minutes. You come home and you feel like you didn't do anything. If you'd feel like you didn't do anything, then you have successfully completed an easy run.
Yes.
And a large base of everything that you do will be revolving around that type of feeling when it comes to an easy day. And so if you go out and you come back and you're like, oh, that was really tiring, that wasn't easy.
Right.
And so the next time you go out, try and pull back even further, and then see if you can't get that feeling of near effortlessness in terms of the final feeling from the pace.
Yeah, I think that was a big shock for me, but that's really what allowed me to realize that I could go much further once I slowed down and realized that it didn't feel like that much work. And I was like, okay, this is how you could actually go further, because it's like I would have gone, I think like 5, maybe 6 miles was like my max, and I just, it was just too much after that. But once I slowed down, it was just like you had cracked the secret of the universe.
Right. Though that, and then you could train more often,
Yes.
Because you
You're not
didn't feel
sore.
nearly as tired or sore from the day before.
Yeah.
And all of that builds upon itself. And the improvement comes from there. And your experience is the same as 99% of people. I guarantee you, the response I always get when I say, okay, based on the information you've provided, these are the paces I think you should run. 99% of the responses are, that's way too slow. I can do faster. And I always say to them, I appreciate that you could do faster. Let's save that for race day. You could do the faster on race day. Let's do this, and we will get there. And you may be surprised at the results being even better by the time you get there.
Yeah, I think that's hard for people to wrap their brain around, maybe at the beginning, if they're not used to that, because or at least my prior experience with running was always like, it felt so hard. And if I wasn't trying to crush it every time I went out there, then I wasn't really getting a good workout, or not really, doing what I was supposed to do as a runner.
I mean, my example that I always provide from personal experience is the 3 years that I started, I ran every run as hard as I could. It was a PR the day mentality. I kept track and said, on this route, it was 3.07 miles. I ran it in this amount of time, and always tried to lower that and beat it every time. And so in those 3 years, I made a modest improvement. When I changed my mindset, and in a span of 18 months, I improved on a percentile base more than I had in the previous 3 years. I lowered my 5K, my 10K, my half, and my full by higher percentiles than I did in the 3 years prior, with thousands of miles on my legs from those 3 years. And then it was like, And in fact, my wife said to me when I finished in October 2015, was one of the first things she said to me is, "You're never going back, are you?" And I said, "No, why would I? I
Yeah,
just had the experience of my life."
awesome. Well, we'll stay in the marathon, but I remember, I mean, and you know, Coach Billy took a lot of time when I first started out. I had questions about everything, and I wanted to know where this was all coming from. And he's great with, he's very patient. He's very patient. I must have sent him 500 messages, but I learned a lot from that back and forth. And I know I personally had a lot of doubt with the marathon distance. Like that just seemed like a very unattainable goal for me. And I believed in the math and I believed it on paper, but I still don't think I really believed it probably until I crossed the finish line. But I was going to ask you how you help athletes navigate through self-doubt. I mean, you definitely helped me through that, especially right before the race. I know I was very nervous, but if you have any tips about that, that would be amazing.
It's funny because, like I said, I've worked with a lot of people, and I actually do remember those conversations, and they're not uncommon, especially when it comes to the marathon distance. So with the other race distances, the 5K, the 10 and a half, which are the traditional race distances that are of lesser distance than the marathon, um, you can get away with a lot more. But the marathon really requires a different technique to it. And that comes from the idea of there really should be placed a time limit on your amount of activity in a single event when in training. And so, some people put it at 150 minutes, other people say 180 minutes, and others obviously don't have time limits depending on which training plans you're looking at. But my philosophy falls on 150 minutes, and so that's where I set the threshold. And so for some people, when they're doing their long run, which is nearly 100% aerobic pace, that's going to end up being 18, 19, or 20 miles. For other people, that's going to end up being 10, 11, or 12 miles. And so you have to convince the person that only running 12 miles is going to be enough to be able to run 26.2 at the end of it. And that's a tall task to accomplish from a mental standpoint. And from my own personal perspective, I also went through that in the spring when I had done that marathon that I did a 4:58 in. I believe I had done 3 or 4 20-milers heading into that race. And so when I changed the philosophy and said, okay, my new cutoff is 150 minutes, that dropped it to 16 miles for me for my pace. And I said to myself, I mean, how is this going to work? I mean, you're going to run 16 miles and then I'm going to run 26.2. And then I ran a 3:38 and I said, okay, yep, yep, they're right. This works. And essentially that's what it comes down to is, I can do my best to explain to others, but eventually it's going to have to come down to, you'll have to trust me. We have lots of experience with lots of other runners. There's a lot of focus on that run, and you say, oh, 150 minutes, and maybe that's a 12-mile max. But don't lose focus that there are 6 other days in the week that we may be spending time on as well. We have a Saturday, and maybe we're doing a 90-minute run on Saturday, and maybe on Thursday we're doing a 60-minute run or a 75-minute run. And so there are other ways to accomplish the goal by balancing out the week or balancing out the month to achieve that goal of running the marathon. And then eventually it just takes trust that my goal is to have you succeed and feel that same enjoyment at the finish line. And so I personally don't want to lead you astray.
Right. And I think, you always put importance on, getting to the start line safely and injury-free is always
Yes.
always of prime importance. And I never lost sight of that. But yeah, it was hard. I could understand, and like it all made sense to me on paper, but believing that without having done it before was hard. But having the other people to say like, yep, we've done this too and it works, that helps a lot.
I mean, the pace thing is very counterintuitive. I'm going to tell you, train slow to
Yeah.
race fast. And then also, I'm going to set a maximum of 150 minutes, which may be 11 miles for you and your pace. And that's going to be enough. Both of those just sound completely insane and outrageous on paper.
Right. But you have to, I think the biggest takeaway is trust the process
Yes.
and that it's not all about just the longest mileage that you can do in training. Like the rest
No.
of that week and that month and that whole training cycle is really what matters. Yeah.
Yeah, I always try and impress upon people that it's not that last 18 miler or 16 miler or 13 miler, whatever your last long run is. If you get sick or whatever and you can't do it, that's not going to completely wreck everything. You have the 2 weeks prior or 3 weeks prior run. You have all the little runs. To me, they're all equally important. And so, if you have to miss a run here or there, it's okay, as long as in the big scheme of the training plan you have balance. You will be okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Like
it's
a
not
big
like
wheel.
it's not like a test you can cram for right at the end. Like
No.
it takes your body a long time to make adaptations, 3-4
Yes.
weeks for each kind of stress that you introduce. So it's not like those last 3 weeks are even perhaps the most important of the training.
No.
It's all the stuff that came before.
Yeah, pretty much at that point, you've got what you got, right?
Yep.
What they say is the hay is in the barn. That's one of the phrases.
Yeah.
You've collected everything at that point.
I think so after this first marathon, right, and I ran the second one, I felt relief, that I got to that point. Like I put in this bulk of training and now we're just cruising until race day. Whereas the first time I was just nervous leading up
Hmm.
to race day.
And that's completely natural, right? I
Yeah.
mean, yeah. I mean, it's a potentially life-changing experience
Mhm.
when you cross that line, and then you think to yourself, what could I do next?
Yeah.
And that's where you head next.
Yeah. That's awesome. Okay. So in part one, we talked a lot about your running journey to date, your first marathon and many marathons after, and how you ended up coaching others. So I want to switch gears a bit to talk about 2020.
Yes.
So you had mentioned earlier to me that in 2015, you learned to train smarter and not harder. And in 2020, you learned to train efficiently and not more. So
Yes.
can you share with us what has been going on with your running over the last year and take us up to speed?
Right. So 2020 was unique in that a lot of races were canceled, and there was an inability to necessarily test yourself out there in that experience. And so I tried to think to myself, what can I do with my time that will be beneficial for the future?
Mhm.
And I said, why not try and run a scientific experiment on myself and see if I can't comb through all the data that I've collected over the last 7, 8 years
Mhm.
and find trends, find information that can push me towards a way to improve my running, but do it with the least amount of time or effort needed.
Mhm.
Essentially make it an efficient experience.
Yep.
And so that's when I sat down, and the first thing I did was I said, okay, when was I at my best? And what characteristics of my training necessarily started to show up when I was at my best?
Mhm.
And so when I did that, the one thing that really stuck out was my Garmin 235's VO2 max measurement.
Mhm.
And so for your viewers, to put it in simplistic terms, my Garmin, I should say. I don't know, everyone's going to have different experiences with different watches, but my Garmin 235 outputs the VO2 max measurement, and essentially it's looking at your heart rate during the run, and it's looking at the pace at which you're doing it, and it's kind of just putting those two together and creating a curve, and then it uses that curve against a lookup table to output a value that it says, okay, this is your score. And so when I've tracked this over since 2017, I've had the same watch, and you can see my values go up and down during my training cycles. And so what I did was I took those values and compared them to my races. And I used a measurement from Jack Daniels called a VDOT to get a numerical score for any distance, whether it's a 5K, 10K, half or full, and it's based on a race equivalency calculator. And then I tried to figure out what's the difference between my VO2 max value from my watch and the VDOT score that is outputted from my actual race performances. And there was a very, very nice relationship between the two. And essentially, if I took 6 points and subtracted it from my watch's value, it would equal the VDOT value. And so it was kind of guiding me and saying, okay, if I can find ways to show when my value on my Garmin VO2 max changes to become higher, then I can try and manipulate that in a training plan.
Yeah.
So that was the next adventure, was trying to find when my value would go up.
Okay. And can you talk a little bit? So in training, we talk about having different goals, like an A race, an A goal versus other goals. So can you tell us a little bit how you, especially in the last year, like have structured training plans to kind of connect them together to reach the A goal, like in between, and talk about that a little bit?
Right. So this is all going to come together. And so you take the information that I had learned up to that point, and I looked through characteristics that showed when that value started to increase versus when it was flat or when it went down. And I found that there's a value called training load. It's a term for, there's 3 measurements, and they go by different names depending on who you read from, but you can call it chronic training, acute training, and the difference between them. So chronic training is how much training have you done over the last 6 weeks? And then acute training is how much training have you done in the last week? And then the difference between the two. And so what I found was, if I could try and keep my difference between what I had done 6 weeks in the last 6 weeks and what I had done in the last 7 days in a very specific range, that's when I saw my increase. And so it goes to the same point that when you're trying to string together your A plan with multiple A's in a year, you have to take time off in between so that your training load drops, so that you have enough room to go up when you restart training. So let's say your A race is in April, and your next A race is in July. So you finish your A race in April, it went really well, and you're like, man, I really want to keep this train going. I'm not going to take any time off. I'm just going to keep pushing. I mean, that's going to work for May and maybe into a little in June, but by the time you get to July, your training is going to stagnate, and you may even start to fall off a little bit, and your performance is going to go down. And that's because your training load difference between your two values is too similar. And so you're not seeing that steady increase of stress that is what provides the ability to improve.
I think I made this mistake after the first half marathon I ran. I got a little bit race happy because I was so excited after I finished. And I signed up. The first one was in January, but then I did two within a month of each other, like two half marathons later on that year, but which could be okay if I had taken one of them, easier. But of course I was trying to PR both of them. And the finish times were very, very similar. So I think I just learned that, but I didn't know that's what I was learning when I made that mistake.
Yeah, I mean, you have to balance it, right? So when you finish a race, it's important to figure out how much time you should take off, or whether it was a B race, you don't necessarily have to take off, maybe just take a couple of days easy.
Mhm.
And so one rule of thumb that I like to use is that for every 3K of the race is 1 day off or easy. So if it's a half marathon, that's 21 kilometers. So that would be somewhere around seven days
Mhm.
of easy or off, in order to be able to drop that load so that you can pick it back up, so that by the time you make it to your next A race, you're in the positive or the green zone, instead of being in neutral training. Your legs are going to feel flat.
Yeah.
So if you do too much of the same thing in a span of time, then eventually you're going to plateau, and you eventually may start going down in terms of fitness, because your body's wants more stress. But there's a limit. There's a limit. So you can't just keep going up.
Mhm.
And I found that in my data as well. When I went back and evaluated, I found that around 13 weeks is where, if I continually try and increase my load from the previous 6 weeks versus the 7 days, if I go past 13 weeks, I either start to stagnate or I start to go down, or that's typically when I ended up getting injured.
Wow. Yeah. And this also speaks to, I think, the fact that you have data from when you started. And so for everybody out there, if you're not keeping track somehow, start keeping track and keep a training journal,
Yes.
just so that, I mean, you taught me that as well, that, it's important, especially to look back from an injury perspective, if that
Hmm.
should happen to you. And I don't know, just with weather changes and things like that, it's been really helpful. So you have all of this data to look at if you should ever want to. Maybe you don't want to, but at least you have it.
I mean, one of the things that always happens is I finish the marathon, right, and then I'll take 1 or 2 weeks off to let my body recover from the event. And
Mhm.
so then when I start to restart running, it's always, oh my God, it's like, what a slog! Like, it just doesn't feel very good.
Yeah.
And so then you're always worried, like, oh, am I ever going to get back to where I was? And so, like, I have the data from multiple marathons, and then I can look at the data, tell me, oh, it takes me roughly 42 days from marathon to when I start to feel quote unquote normal again. So
Yeah.
then I pretty much just set it like a clock and just say, okay, I finished this race on day X plus 42, that's the day I'm going to feel good again. And
Yeah.
it happens more often to be right than it is wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. Now wait, tell us what you're working toward a race pretty soon, right?
Yes, so I
Yes.
have the it's called the non-canceled marathon.
Yay.
It's on May 1st.
Oh,
And
that's
so it's,
coming fast.
yes, it's 2 weeks, two
Okay.
weeks. And so I used the fall of 2020, and I wrote a training plan specifically to try and make my values go up with what I would consider to be an efficient amount of training, and trying to make it easier on myself. Because in 2019, I was training for the 2020 Disney Marathon, and really put my heart and soul into that one, and
Yeah.
went way beyond what I probably should have done. I thought to myself, I'm going to really devote myself for 6 months. And I think in December, I was close to 75 hours of training in that month,
Wow.
between my cycling and my weightlifting and my running.
Yeah.
And when I go back and look at the values, it didn't make a difference. I wasn't any better than if
Yeah.
I had done 8, 10, or 11 hours instead.
Wow.
And so I said to myself, like, it's not doing me any good at that point. So in the fall of 2020, I wrote a training plan specifically based on those key factors that I had found in my data.
Hmm.
And I was right there. I mean, I was at peak fitness and super happy with it. I ended up getting an ankle injury because I tied my shoe too tight,
Oh
which just,
no.
I mean, how that happens sometimes, right?
Yeah.
I don't even
Yeah.
know. I don't even know, but it happened. And so then the non-canceled marathon came up here for May 1st,
I
and I
love the
was like,
name.
okay, I'm gonna also try and do a very similar thing. In fact, I dropped it a little bit even more from that fall 2020 plan to
Okay.
see if I could do even just slightly less to keep myself injury free. And I'm also tying my shoes a little less tight. Uh,
Okay, good. Yeah, no.
and so far it's been working out. I'm happy where I'm at.
Good. Oh my goodness. Well, obviously all of us are wishing you the best, and we can't wait to hear what happens.
Thank you. I
um,
appreciate it.
yeah. Speaking to injuries, now that you brought up the ankle,
Mhm.
do you have any advice? I know a lot of people struggle. I know I did after an injury to, yeah, you feel like you're never going to get that fitness back, or you feel like it's just going to take, you put so much work in and now you had to take time off and it's going to take so long to get back. Do you have any words of wisdom for working back from injuries? Because I know you have recently done that
Yeah, I mean, I've done it more
a few
times than I
times.
would want to, right?
Yes.
I mean, and those things happen. And some of them have been short-term injuries, and some of them have been long-term injuries. I think my longest was in the fall of 2018. I had an ankle tendonitis injury, and I ended up taking 19 weeks off
Hmm.
from running after that one. And that's when I really switched from pure running to including cycling in my training from that point forward. And so, yeah, that's one of the things I said to myself is, okay, you took 19 weeks off. How long is it going to take you to get back to that same point? And again, through the data I've found for myself, and also it's in Jack Daniel's book, that it's pretty much equal to how much time you took off to how much time it takes to return. And so if you end up having to take off for 2 weeks, then it's probably going to take you about 2 weeks to return to where you were, maybe a
Hmm.
little, maybe an extra 2 weeks. So usually it's 2 weeks off, and it's going to be 4 weeks to return. So you're looking at a 6 week total. So, I mean, yeah, they happen. If it's a short term thing, though, if it takes 3 days, 4 days, 5 days,
Yeah.
usually you're going to
Yeah.
have pretty minimal. You might feel like you've lost something, but in
Yeah.
reality, it really isn't the case. It'll be back sooner than you think.
Yeah.
And
I
so it
think
just takes patience.
no, patience definitely. But you're definitely right. However many weeks you took off, and I thought it was going to take longer than that, but both times I have worked back from an injury, it's been, my fitness was there and it came back, I don't know, better sometimes than when it was before. So I
Again,
don't
because
know.
the training load dropped, right?
Yeah.
So if the training load drops, then you provide yourself room to grow from that point forward. So
Yeah.
sometimes it works in your favor.
Yeah. That's very true. Um, I think you hit on this quite a bit during this talk, but could you describe a little bit how running has really transformed your life? I mean, I could probably pick out 5 things, but maybe 50.
I mean, we go back to the beginning in 2012, and I didn't want to do it.
Right.
And now I'm at a point where I do everything possible to keep it going.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's made a huge difference for me in my life and the interactions that I have with other people, and the joy that I can bring to other people, as well as the joy I can bring to myself. But one of the big reasons I started it was, back in January 2012, we had that conversation, and I have a daughter now. At that point, I didn't. I do now.
Yeah.
She's 7, and she's watching, right? She knows what you're doing. And one thing I want to explain to her is don't let other people set your limits. You set your own limits. You choose what you want to do with your life and the goals you want to set for yourself. And then they're not necessarily going to be handed to you, right? So you have to put in the work. And so one of the phrases that I like to use is, if you want it, prove it by doing what is necessary to get it.
Yeah, I love
And
it.
so I live that example every day for her.
Yeah, and what a great example you are. Oh my goodness. For
Thank you.
all of us. That gave me chills. All right. So tell us where we can find you and what services you offer.
Right. So you can find me at blasercoachingservices.com. And I've got a website. It's got several different tools that you can use on there. I've got a blog that I don't write that often, but when I do write, I've got something to say, and I try and do a lot of research on the topics that I bring. So I bring a very science, data-driven approach. I like data, so you can see that from everything we've talked about so far. So
Yes, yeah, no, but it's great. There's lots of information there. And if you want to get in touch with Coach Billy for a plan, you can find out all the information there as well. And I'll leave them below. So thank you so much, Coach Billy, for being here and sharing your wisdom and your story with us. It's inspiring. And every time I talk to you, I feel very excited for my own training as well.
I appreciate it. Yes, it was a lot of fun. But I have to say, my daughter would be upset with me if I didn't say hi to you from YouTube. Hi.
Thank you so much for joining us. That was an awesome conversation. If you are a beginner runner or a runner who hasn't run in a while and you're looking to start in the sport or get back into the sport, I would love to help you get started. You can schedule a consult call with me at the link below. And don't forget to like the video and share it with a friend if you found it inspiring. Thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you next time.